Alright, so you're trying to decide between the Sennheiser Momentum 4 and the Sony XM5, which I'll just call the XM5. Hey there, my name is Norb, and if you have any questions after watching this comparison, hit me up in the comments or watch my deep dives, which I will link to at the end. First point of comparison, of course, is the cost. The Momentum 4 retails at $379 in the US, and the XM5 goes for about $399, although I usually see both for lower than that, and sometimes under $300, so they're really about the same price. By the way, I've added product links in the description which you can use to compare prices. Using those also helps out the channel at no cost to you. Both of these come with a travel case and both come with charging and audio cables. Now, the case on the Momentum 4 is a bit on the bulky side, but it comes with a loop for a carabiner so you can actually clip it to the outside of your bag instead of having to store it inside. The case has a far more interesting feature though. It puts the headphones into low power mode when you put the headphones inside. The problem is that if you turn off the headphones by long pressing the power button, putting them inside the case will actually turn them back on sometimes and reconnect them to your device. As a workaround, I added some Velcro to lower this middle piece and pack the headphones ear pads up, which avoids the magnet that turns it back on. The XM5's case, on the other hand, is nice, but it's less interesting. Now, it is more meant for travel and it's less bulky. It has a sloping angle thing and it actually squishes down so you can store it when you're actually using the headphones. But other than that, it comes with a nice carabiner loop too. I guess that's nice too. The case isn't something that people tend to base a purchase on, but given the Momentum 4's connection issue and case size, I think Sony is better for travelers. Moving on to battery life, this one is no contest. The Momentum 4 offers up to 60 hours of battery life with the default settings. Sony advertises up to 30 hours of battery life. Finally, they both also quick charge. You get 4 hours of music and 5 minutes of charging with the Momentum 4 versus 3 hours of music in 3 minutes from the XM5. Now let's take a look at the user interface and design. The XM5 feels delicate, but it's actually pretty durable. After 2 years and a lot of trips, mine are still in pretty great shape. They're super light with soft touch plastic made from recycled car soundproofing material, which feels fantastic in the hand. The ear pads and earbands are made of this vegan leatherette that feels kind of rubbery, but it's still nice. The ear pads are also replaceable, though the round headband design is a bit odd, and I'll talk about that in the comfort section. Most controls are handled via the touchpad on the right ear cup, but there are also buttons on the left for noise canceling, power, and launching apps like Spotify. It has on-head detection, which pauses and resumes music when you take them off or put them back on, and that works perfectly. It also includes a 3.5mm audio jack and a USB-C port for charging. The Momentum 4 borrows a lot from the Sony line, especially with its touch controls, which is new for Sennheiser. It has just one button for power and everything else is handled by touch, including the noise cancelling. I found the controls on the XM5 to be simpler and easier to use though. Like the XM5, it has on-ear detection, but it didn't always work well with my glasses. It would sometimes pause when I would adjust them. It features both a USB-C port for charging and audio, along with a 2.5mm audio jack. As for the build, the Momentum 4 is mostly plastic, with replaceable protein leather ear cups, fabric on top of the headband, and silicone underneath. One thing I want to call out is Sony's smart features, specifically through the Sound Connect app. There are other apps, but this one is the most important. The Sound Connect app shows off all of the XM5's features, which include autoplay settings so you can control your music without having to touch your phone at all,
sound improvements like the SEE Extreme,
spatial sound optimization,
ear shape analysis, access to sound.
I know this is a lot, but that's my point. The XM5 is second to no one when it comes to smart features, almost to the point of overload. On the other hand, the Momentum 4 has a simpler app with some sound personalization and location-based features. It is a lot easier to understand, but it's also much more limited. Sony's features are definitely for power users and people who love optimizing all the things. For build and design, I'm giving this one to the XM5. I think Sony did a much better job than Sennheiser when it came to their choice of materials and their lightness. For the user interface, again, the XM5 wins. The app design on the Sennheiser is much simpler, but with Sony, not only is the button scheme more intuitive, but the app just has way more features, and the newest updates brings the most important features front and center. So you don't have to dig around if you don't want a deep dive. Moving on to comfort, starting with the XM5. It's lightweight at 250 grams or 8.8 ounces, so it doesn't press down much on your head and it doesn't squeeze too hard. The fit is nice, it's not too light and not too loose. The ear pads are a little bit on the thin side, but they work just fine for me even with glasses on. I've heard complaints about the ear heat, but I haven't noticed that. The ear cups are a little bit cramped because the speakers are flat. The main issue for me though is the round headband. It can create some pressure right at the top of the head after long use, though it does soften over time. It's still a bit of a hot spot. Overall, the XM5 is comfortable, but it isn't perfect. The Momentum 4 is a bit heavier, coming in at 316 grams or 11.1 ounces. It has very soft ear pads and a clamping force that feels about the same as the XM5's. The ear pads are broader and more plush, but they get too hot, which is my only real complaint about the comfort on these. The ear pads create an excellent seal and are very comfortable with the glasses. The speakers inside are also angled a bit, although they are a little bit shallow, so your ears may still touch the ear pads. The headband is nice and wide, and the silicone padding is fine for long-term use, although sometimes it does get a little bit warm. Regardless, I'm calling this one a tie. They're both good, but both have their issues, and I don't really love either. Noise canceling and ambient sound modes are other areas where Sennheiser took a lot of cues from Sony. A quick refresher, ambient sound or transparency mode is where the headphones use the microphones to let sound from the outside into the headphones, which is good if you need to keep an ear out for things like flight announcements or conversations. As far as that goes, the Momentum 4 sounds more natural than the XM5 in this mode. As for noise canceling, let me start with the XM5. In short, they are fantastic and I love them, although it has what some consider to be a pretty major flaw. Starting with the good. The XM5 are the quietest headphones I've used. There is just no competition here. The plastic used on these comes from cars and it is designed to be both light and block out noise. This lets it block much higher frequencies than with most other headphones. Here's the problem though. These have adaptive noise canceling. This means that the headphones adjust the noise canceling according to the air pressure and the level of noise around you. The problem is that very often you'll hear them readjust over and over again, especially if you're on a plane. It's not terrible, but it's definitely distracting, and it's something that a lot of you had called me out on for not harping on enough during my initial review. So here we are, I'm harping on it. While it is annoying, outside of planes, it's never really been all that bad. I haven't really even noticed it. You can still use the app to determine how much noise canceling or ambient sound you actually want, although it will still readjust every so often. You can also set it to focus on voices, meaning it tries to block everything out except what's in the vocal range. I haven't really made a ton of use of that. I didn't find it all that useful when I tried it. The Momentum 4's noise canceling isn't nearly as good in general, but it's decent enough, and it has one major advantage. You can turn that adaptive noise canceling off. This lets you manually use either the slider in the app or touch controls to determine how much noise canceling or transparency you actually want. My only issue with this way of doing it is that there doesn't seem to be a clear way to turn both noise canceling and transparency off. Now that's something you can do with the XM5. Both have a feature that adapts the noise canceling depending on your geographic location, but Sony takes it one step further and figures out what you're doing at that location, like walking or running or sitting, then adapts accordingly. In both cases, I found this to be more annoying than useful, so I turned this off. Sony also has a feature where if you speak, it will pause the music. That gets annoying too. All in all, if transparency is really important to you, then the Momentum 4 gets the points. But for most people, noise canceling is the bigger issue, and while I find that the XM5 is better, if the issue with it adjusting is going to really bother you, then go for the Momentum 4 instead. It'll block less noise, but it's also less distracting. Alright, so it's time to compare sound, which I'll divide into two major areas, music and movies. A few technical notes. Starting with codecs. The Momentum 4 uses SBC, AAC, aptX, aptX HD, and aptX Adaptive. The XM5 uses SBC, AAC, and LDAC. If you have a device that can use LDAC, then it's generally going to be the better codec, at least under ideal conditions. Under less than ideal conditions, it's about the same as aptX HD or aptX Adaptive. Apple users just get AAC, which is AAC. I mean, it's not great, but it's not bad. It's just not as good as the other ones. Android users are going to have all the fun. Both can multi-connect and pair with up to 8 devices, and this is easy to manage on both using their apps. Automatically switching between devices is pretty reliable on both. As for non-wireless audio, the XM5 uses a 3.5mm cable. The Momentum 4, on the other hand, can use the audio cable, plus you can also listen to audio using the USB-C cable, which handles lossless audio. So for wired sound, the Momentum 4 is definitely the better option. Finally, both include a ton of sound personalization options using their apps. The Momentum 4 gives you a 5-band EQ with additional bass boost, a podcast mode, included EQ presets, programmable EQ settings that you can save, and adjustable sound personalization that's done through an audio test. The XM5 has a 6-band EQ and a number of presets, adjustable sound personalization that's done through an audio test, plus acoustic ear shape analysis. For the rest of this, I'll compare the two headphones with their basic settings, although I'll call out any exceptions where necessary. Starting with the Momentum 4, it has a lot of bass, and while the bass might feel overpowering for some, it's never muddy, mostly because it's focused on the sub-bass rather than the upper bass, so there's still some decent clarity in the mids. And while you have a solid rumble and physicality, you don't have that overt punch. At the highs, you still get some good presence and brilliance, but I found it a little bit exhausting at times. Still, Because of the tuning and its sensitivity, I find the timbre to be excellent. I'm a huge fan of both lo-fi and classical, and both of those do extremely well with the Momentum 4. The soundstage is also decent with solid instrument separation, but there's no spatial mode. There's no 360 audio like what the XM5 has. While the sound is never open, it also doesn't necessarily feel too cramped. My complaints about the Momentum 4 come down to exhaustion during long listening sessions and volume, although these are both very minor. The overwhelming amount of bass and sub-bass is fun at first, but I got tired of it quickly. And then you also have the upper part of the frequency response, which the way that it's shaped makes things feel a little bit harsh at times. As for the volume, look, I'm usually using them at the lowest possible volume settings because the headphones don't really go all that low. On the other hand, pushing them to the max volume doesn't always feel all that loud, and that's because there's a dip in the frequency response in the areas where voices are usually resonating and hanging out in. So they sound a little bit quieter even though they're actually loud, hence the rumble and the exhaustion. They sound good, mind you, but they do sound a bit pulled back. Moving on to the XM5. I don't love it, especially with the default tuning. It lacks detail, it feels muddy at times. It can be fun, I guess, but it reminds me a bit of the sound of the older Beats headphones, where there's just a bunch of bloat in the low and mids and the upper bass. It's better than that, but that's what it reminds me of. That's what it sounds like to me. Mind you, it is a relaxing sound, and I can listen to it for a long time. It's just not satisfying, especially with acoustic instruments and voices. The timbre is just not very good. Genres like folk and indie and classical and jazz, they aren't all that enjoyable with the XM5. You can fix a lot of this with the equalizer, and I made a whole video about that, so make sure to check it out, but there's only so much that the EQ can do. When you update the tuning, the XM5 definitely gets way better. It can be a bit more clear and it sounds a bit more fresh. And the sound improves drastically when you use LDAC versus another codec, so if that's an option, things get way better. But even in that case, it always sounds very closed in. Almost always. Sony has their 360 reality audio, which can be used with a few musical services as well as some Sony TVs. If we're going to break this down into specific musical genres, I can't. The Momentum 4 are just better across the board. The only upside to the XM5 is that I feel it sounds more relaxing than the Momentum 4. For movies, that's another story if you have access to the 360 reality audio features. In this case, especially with LDAC, the XM5 shined for movies and shows. Without this, they're on par. I'm putting this as a tie because of that. Now, if you watch all this and you're wondering who should buy what, these are two very different headphones. Do you want better noise canceling? Go for the XM5. Do you want better sound? Go for the Momentum 4. But your best bet? Test both if you can. And again, I've added product links in the description where you can get more information or even buy them. There's one big topic I need to touch on. During my initial review, I called out a bunch of bugs with the Momentum 4. It had a lot of issues. But over time, things have gotten better. So while it does have some issues still, it's definitely in a better place than it was when I originally reviewed it. So there you have it. If you want to find out more, click here or here if you want to watch my full deep dive on either of these, or click on this playlist here to see more comparisons.